Hi, everyone. Good morning. We will start in a few minutes to allow people a little time to join the webinar. Oh boy. I'm hearing from some folks in the chat room that their audio, they're having audio issues. You're going to need to dial in from a phone for the audio, and you'll view the presentation electronically via your laptop or desktop. So go ahead and call in separately with the Zoom number and the meeting ID number and join the call for audio that way. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, just a quick sec. Everyone can see the welcome slide? Anyone can see the welcome slide being shared?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll begin in about 1 minute. Oops. Sorry, can folks hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just realized, I think folks didn't hear some of that part. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have two wonderful speakers and a very enlightening topic for our webinar today. So we'll get started in just a minute after I go over a couple of logistical items. There is a slide presentation, as you can see. Everyone should be able to see the welcome slide of the deck that's now on the screen. And if not, please use the URL that was included in the article on UCNet's homepage. We are recording this webinar, so all lines are muted. And the video, the only video you should see are our presenters and myself briefly. I'll disappear after I finish speaking. So please be sure to turn off your video via the Zoom controls. And don't worry, because if you're unable to, I will go ahead and I will delete your video feed into the meeting. So in case you become visible, don't worry, I'll make sure that the window is closed. We do want to hear from you, so please use the Zoom chat feature to submit your questions. If you're familiar with Zoom, or if you're not familiar with Zoom, a toolbar will appear either at the top or the bottom of the Zoom application window. You're going to click on the word More with the 3 dots above it, and that drop-down menu will give you an option for chat. You click on the chat, the dialog box will open. You simply type your question into the field and you hit Enter to send. And our presenters would like to hear from the audience, and we'll field questions at the end of the presentation. Of course, if there's something that's very specific to a given slide, I may gently interrupt and pose your question at that point. But generally, we'll hold our questions to it. And someone's audio is, well, we'll deal with that in just a moment. I can hear someone's audio. The recording will be provided to everyone via UCNet by the end of this week, by Friday, and it will include both audio and visual. It'll appear on the Stigma-Free UC page, which is under the System-Wide Wellbeing on UCNet. Okay, so we have our webinar house in order. I'd like to explain a little bit about how today's session fits in with the bigger picture. The webinar was created in partnership with Dr. Balan and Dr. Kristen Herman and the Stigma-Free UC initiative, which is part of the UC System-Wide Wellbeing. The System-Wide Wellbeing Initiative sponsors and promotes events, programs, and resources that impact and improve UC employees' emotional, financial, physical, and nutritional well-being. In support of UC employees' emotional well-being, the Stigma-Free UC initiative was developed to foster open, positive discussions about mental health, because the first step in reducing and eliminating prejudice regarding mind disorders is to talk about them and to promote awareness around this multifaceted topic. To that end, the Stigma-Free UC has been a one-year awareness project which provides monthly programming and is focused on the elimination of mental illness discrimination through educational webinars, discussions, videos, and more. And because every human being lies somewhere on the mental health continuum, the overarching goal here is to increase our collective compassion by sharing the vast knowledge of UC experts and UC partner experts who will help us learn about the spectrum of mind disorders and how to avoid ostracizing individuals who live with them. The polarizing concept of the other crazy person no longer exists. The continuum of mental health and illness encompasses all of us. And the initiative is important because statistics show that those who learn about mind disorders show more compassion towards those with a disorder. Therefore, throughout our 2018 and now into 2019 program, we'll continue to emphasize that mind disorders are simply part of the human condition. So let me briefly introduce our 2 speakers. Yener Balan is a doctor and a board-certified psychiatrist who is currently the executive director of behavioral health for Kaiser Permanente, Northern California. He provides health plan oversight and direction to the Northern California Behavioral Health Program as they engage members and families in quality improvement efforts, implementation processes that focus on proactive intervention and prevention. They also engage with organizations in the community to help shape the growth, education, and training of the behavioral health workforce at Kaiser. He is also the best-selling author of The Big Book of Emergency Department Psychiatry, A Guide to Patient-Centered Operational Improvement. And on a personal note, Dr. Balan was raised in New York City, and he still misses the East Coast, and although he's made a home for himself here in Oakland, California, where he lives with his wife and his 6-year-old son. And Jennifer Kristen Herman is the Executive Director of Strategic Customer Engagement at Kaiser Permanente. She's responsible for work around mental health and emotional well-being and other emerging trends. Jennifer, who has her PhD in clinical psychology and is a licensed clinical psychologist, has worked at Kaiser Permanente for the past 8 years. And prior to that, she worked for Cigna Health and has also held roles at Cerner Health Solutions and at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute and Department of Psychology. Oh, did I say that correctly? Yeah, neuropsychiatric. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I said that correctly. Jennifer is also very passionate about housing as a driver of health and serves on the board of directors for the Skid Row Housing Trust, which provides permanent supportive housing to over 1,800 of Los Angeles' most vulnerable, chronically homeless individuals. So let's now welcome Jennifer Christian Herman, who will begin today's presentation.
Great, thank you, Maura, and thank you so much for having us here today to talk about mental health stigma and how to have conversations about mental health issues. As you may know, mental health conditions are highly prevalent. So 1 in 5 individuals is dealing with a mental health condition at any given time. And yet, it's very challenging to have those conversations, whether you are the one struggling with mental health symptoms or whether you're worried about someone in your life. So we want to today talk a little bit about how you can find your words and equip you to have some of those conversations. So first, what we want to do, actually, if you can back up one slide, sorry, Laura, is to just to set a little bit of context about mental health and why it's important. Then, as I said, wanted to talk about some practical ways to find words to start conversations, to support someone else, or to get help yourself. And then we will share some tools and resources that may be helpful to you as you encounter some of these conversations. So with that, we're going to start with a little video from some of the experts.
Sorry, there's a slight streaming delay.
Expert 1, take 1.
We'll just kind of jump right into it. So, hi.
Hi.
Being depressed is ongoing. It's an unshakable feeling of hopelessness.
Loss of interest in things that are usually enjoyable. Depression can go on for weeks and often months if it's not treated.
Mental illness is like any other physical illness.
Because of the stigma that still exists, we're having a hard time accepting the fact that people actually have disorders.
Depression and mental health challenges, they don't discriminate. They affect everyone.
We all know somebody, love somebody, or are somebody dealing with these conditions. So we really want to encourage people to get help.
No matter what kind of mental health issue.
Expert 1, take 1.
We'll just kind of jump right into it. So, hi.
Hi.
Being depressed is ongoing. It's an unshakable feeling of hopelessness.
Loss of interest in things that are usually enjoyable. Depression can go on for weeks and often months if it's not treated.
Mental illness is like any other physical illness.
Because of the stigma that still exists, we're having a hard time accepting the fact that people actually have disorders.
Depression and mental health challenges, they don't discriminate. They affect everyone.
We all know somebody, love somebody, or are somebody dealing with these conditions. So we really want to encourage people to get help.
No matter what kind of mental health issue someone has, people can get better and they do get better.
People who seek treatment for depression stay better longer than people who don't.
It's important for people who struggle with it to remember that what they're dealing with, it does not define who they are.
If you're worried about somebody, a loved one, say, hey, I care about you and I'm concerned.
I think we're in the process of bringing mental health out of the closet. Once we start being able to talk about it, we're going to be a lot further at making it okay for people to seek treatment.
I'm seeing more and more young people come into my practice, and I don't think that's because more young people are getting depressed earlier. I think there's better diagnosis.
It's part of the human experience. Sometimes it's not the pleasant part, but I know what a difference it can make when you get connected to people who care.
All right, thank you. Maura, if we could go to the slides. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yener, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Jennifer. When we're talking about mental health and mental illness, trying to understand sort of that spectrum along the journey of someone's health, really to be able to understand where along the line of the individual and their life and their surrounding, how that affects themselves, right? So the World Health Organization, WHO, defines mental health as a state of well-being, right? Where someone is able to realize their own abilities, where they can cope with normal stresses of day-to-day life, where they can work productively, fruitfully, but then also able to make a contribution to themselves, their family, and their communities. So that's mental health. What about mental illness, right? The pathology, understanding where that starts to then interfere with the person's life. And that's personal and changes and varies from person to person. And one of the things that I want to bring up is recently we had a goldfish and it died, right? And when the goldfish died, we were certainly upset, and we cleaned out the aquarium and took my son to school, and I came to work. All right, fine. And so we were upset. We appropriately grieved for the goldfish. Fine. Now imagine same scenario where we're grieving, but now I'm crying. Okay. I encourage people to express their emotions. Crying and sadness is normal and healthy. And then we went to school, and then I came to work. Fine. Now imagine a scenario where I'm crying and I'm late to work. Okay, well, I can probably afford to be late once, maybe twice, and explain that to my colleagues. But then now imagine a scenario where I'm late, I'm missing work, or I call out sick that day. Okay, I've got sick days. I could probably afford a sick day. But now I'm calling out sick once, twice. I'm missing work. And then now I'm stopping shaving, right? I don't necessarily need to shave. I'm not going to work. But now I'm also not taking care of my child, right? So my spouse is now picking up some of the responsibilities. But now I'm not taking care of myself, not going to work, I'm not taking care of my child, I'm not continuing my relationship with my spouse, and I'm missing work day after day after day. I'm not sleeping properly, right? I'm sleeping less, I'm getting irritated, agitated, right? And now think all of that, and now I'm eating less, I'm not spending time with my friends, my spouse, etc. And now I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't find any hope going forward. Right? So same stimulus, different levels of response, and within the spectrum of my own life, right, the individual's own life, where does that then start to become pathology? Where does that start to become an impact on that person's day-to-day ability to do essentially what you need to do? And that is the common defining factor in any illness or any mental illness when you define that as impacting their day-to-day life. If we go to the next slide, please. So I'm not seeing the screen. Are folks able to see the mental health conditions affect slide? Is that up? Okay. Well, let me just continue, and while that slide comes up. So basically, mental health conditions, right, looking at the prevalence, lifetime prevalence for the individual, but then across the nation. So in America, 1 in 5 Americans in any given year will experience a mental health condition, right? And so what does that mean? Right? When you're understanding sort of the individual, the prevalence, lifetime prevalence of illnesses, for example, depression, is 20% lifetime prevalence. I think this is the previous slide. For anxiety disorders, it's 30% lifetime prevalence. What does that even mean? Right? 1 in 3 of us, at some point in our lives, will have an anxiety disorder. Right? And so being able to understand not only the prevalence and how common these issues are, I think if we could just go back a couple of slides, please, understanding how common these issues are, but then also being able to understand sort of, thank you, within the context of a community, or, and I'm very appreciative of being able to speak with all of you today, being able to understand within an organization, but then also within a workforce, right, as an employer, right, looking at issues such as, if I'm absent from work, that's one thing, or if I'm at work and I'm sort of not as productive as I normally or I'm expected to be, that's another thing, right? So either missing work or not being as productive are ways to actually quantify this, and it's not necessarily the nicest thing to say, but we can actually look at this, right? There was a Harvard Business Review study that looked at lost productivity and actually the cost on the economy for, in 1 year, up to $44 billion lost in productivity, right? And I don't like to think like that, right? And we shouldn't, but in reality, that gives you sort of the context to then to be able to say, okay, if that's a measurable goal or outcome or target, what can we then do essentially to appreciate how to understand, recognize the need for at least attention, and then appropriate diagnosis, and then treatment, and then ultimately sustaining wellness, right? So that you're really getting upstream ahead of these issues and being able to appreciate sort of the impact on how this affects us day to day, but then not us individually, alone, but then in our families and in our communities. So if we go to the next slide, please. The good news is that when you're in front of somebody that can help you, right, a clinician, a provider, people get better. You get better. Right? That's the only reason why these industries and these things exist, right? Psychology, psychiatry. That's why it exists, is because we have jobs, because people get better, right? And so I'm being playful with this just to help people remind and understand that this stuff works, right? When you have a unipolar, like a depressive disorder, a depressive episode, 80% of people, right, get better, significantly better, improvement in symptoms within 4 to 5 weeks of initiating treatment. What does that mean? What does treatment even mean, right? And so we'll talk a little bit later about some of the myths and the misconceptions, but realistically, like I was giving that sort of silly example of my goldfish dying, but understanding that for myself, what I would need is guaranteed very different than what Jennifer would need, right? In her life, in her community, in her ability to negotiate the world, right? So this is an individualized, targeted treatment that's going to work for Yener, the individual, the patient in front of you, the person, right? And so things like individual therapy, talk therapy, psychotherapy, being able to talk about your ideas, fantasies, concerns on a one-to-one level. Right? Then there's other options like in a group milieu, like in a setting where you can then sit with other folks' stories and understand sort of the socialization aspect and how it affects other people, really looking at stories of resilience and coping. And then certainly there's the concept, and I am a psychiatrist by training, the concept of medications. And what options are there to care for somebody with an illness that will respond to a medicine, a pill you take once a day, et cetera. Now, we understand that, right? And I appreciate that. We appreciate the concept of treatment and folks getting better, right? And measurable outcomes. But then when we look at sort of the staggering statistic of only 44% of folks that need care, need treatment, that have a mental health condition that's affecting their life, getting the care or the treatment that they need, this raises a question in my mind. Why is this closer to 100% or 100%, right? And part of it is the reason why we're talking today with all of you. So the stigma piece, a part of it certainly on another end of sort of the picture is access and essentially availability of getting care that you need, right? Physical, human to care for you and a place to go to. But then there's also something in between that I want to bring up to folks as well, which hopefully as you're listening to this and you're thinking about this and having conversations about this later on, you understand that, and one of the barriers also is knowing that you can have care, knowing that you can actually get better, and knowing that there is something to be able to identify either within yourself or the folks that that you care for, that you work with, to be able to say, hey, you know what, this is, identifying it, diagnosing it essentially, and then saying, you can get care. Why don't you go to this person, this clinician, et cetera? And so those are the things that I want people to sort of start to become a lot more familiar with. And really, as you're listening to Jennifer and I as we talk with one another and we're explaining things, really appreciate that the value in the conversation itself and feeling comfortable talking about this. If you go to the next slide, please.
Sure. I'm going to pause for a moment to mute the audio.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, very good. So now we are unmuted and we can speak. Okay, so Maura, if you can move to the next slide. So, so as Yener said, and as the previous slides show, high prevalence of mental health conditions. So 1 in 5 Americans, mental health conditions are treatable, yet very small percentage of individuals actually access treatment. So why is that? And mental health stigma definitely is an important factor in that. There are negative stereotypes about mental illness or individuals with mental illness. We're going to talk about some of the myths and misperceptions in a few minutes. But individuals with mental illness often fear rejection. They fear negative repercussions in the workplace. Individuals hold their own negative perceptions about mental illness, and all of these things combined with the symptoms that someone is facing makes it very difficult to speak up. And I think for individuals who are concerned about someone else, it also makes it difficult to know what to say. So stigma is definitely a big issue. I think one thing that often comes up is a belief that mental illness is different somehow from physical illness, that it's more of a character flaw or a sign of weakness, when in fact it's a biologic condition, just as is diabetes or asthma or cancer or other conditions. And yet amongst our friends and certainly in the workplace, if someone shows up at work with a cast on their leg, you ask what happened, are you okay, do you need help? If someone reveals they have a diagnosis of cancer or some other very serious condition, people arrange meals to bring to the person. There's definitely an outpouring of support, but also when someone acknowledges that they're struggling with a mental health condition, or you're concerned that someone may be experiencing mental health symptoms, there's silence, and that just reinforces that there is something negative going on that should not be discussed. So in a recent survey, 1 in 10 employees who had a mental health condition said that shame and stigma prevented them from seeking treatment. So it's really important that employers focus on this and focus on a workplace culture of openness and inclusion. And so this UC Stigma-Free campaign, I think, is a really great example of something that UC is doing to really focus on that. So now we want to turn to some of the myths and misperceptions. Some of them we've already given you some of the answers as we've gone along. So Yener, I think we'll go back and forth on these a bit.
And so if we could just stay there for a second. So basically, I'm going to be presenting the myth, and Jennifer will be bringing up sort of the fact and sort of this conversation. And so ignore for half a second that we spent the majority of our lives studying this, and we know the reality. So for example, Jennifer, people with mental health conditions never get better. They just never get better.
All right, so I've already told you the answer to this one, but people do get better. So some mental health conditions are chronic conditions, and so people may have a recurrence, but treatment works. So approximately 8 in 10 individuals who receive treatment get better, have remission, and it varies a little bit by condition, but you can see here 9 in 10 individuals who have panic attacks find that treatment is effective for them.
And for everyone listening, appreciate as I'm saying this out loud, what your reaction to these things are. And you can read sort of the light blue boxes that I'm going to say, but appreciate sort of what it sounds like to you. Appreciate your own preconceived notions, right? Your prejudices, your stigma, yourself, your biases, and just acknowledge it silently, sort of to yourself, and understanding that, and really the what we're modeling sort of is being able to feel comfortable talking about it, right? And Jennifer isn't saying, Yener, you're so ridiculous, I can't believe you just said that. It's more just, okay, well, I understand that you're saying this, and sort of coming up with the reality or the facts with this. But in your day-to-day sort of conversations or when you're approaching others, really feeling comfortable about sort of where you're coming from with your own issues, stigma, and that I think is the healthiest path to actually overcoming that for yourself, but then also helping others. So I realize as I'm saying this, I'm hearing this myself, and these are things I would never say myself. But so imagine if I said to you, Jennifer, people with mental health conditions, they're just weak.
Okay, so you can pull up the next answer. So as we said, mental illness is not a character flaw. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a biologic condition, just as other health conditions are. It can be exacerbated by things that go on in someone's life. Similarly, just as with other physical health conditions, and there's no single cause for mental illness. There are many factors that contribute, but the most important thing is that it's not the individual's fault. They've done nothing wrong. It's not a sign of their weakness.
And here's another one that's a little bit more serious and tricky, and thankfully we have regulations and laws around this. But if I get treatment, Jennifer, I know I have depression, so I acknowledge that. My employer is going to find out. My boss is going to find out, and I'm worried sort of what that's going to do for my, I don't know, health insurance, my life insurance. I might even get, not be asked to work here anymore. So what do you have to sort of say about that? Because that's worrisome to me. And I've actually heard people say, educated people who are in the industry saying things like this. Sure.
All right, if you want to pull up the next answer, Mara. So first of all, treatment for mental health conditions that's a privacy issue. So just as treatment for physical health conditions, so care that you receive from a mental health provider, that you might receive from your primary care physician or another physician, treatment that you receive from an EAP provider, even though your EAP is provided through your employer, your mental health counseling or treatment is protected. And so that it is not something that your employer will find out about. There are also protections in the workplace, as there are for other conditions, if someone has a mental health condition and that is impacting their performance. And so one thing that we'll talk about a little later is just it is up to you as an individual with mental illness to decide whom you want to tell about your condition and what you want to share about that.
Oh, thank you. And lastly, and so one of my parts of training, right, is the ability to then prescribe a medicine, right, as a prescriber, as a physician, right. But people will come to me, and have come to me for a long time, and saying, hey, I don't want to see a shrink. I don't want you to prescribe me medications. I don't want to take medications. So just the aspect of going into treatment is going to be defaulting me. You're going to give me meds, and I have to be on meds forever. What's a way to sort of respond to that?
Sure. So there are many forms of treatment for different mental health conditions. So medication may be and can be very effective for treatment, but there are many other effective forms of treatment, including individual psychotherapy or talk therapy, as you said earlier, group therapy and other things. And that treatment is something that is decided in partnership with your mental health provider. So, your physician will advise you on things, but an individual has a say in what their treatment plan is and may decide that medication is an important part of that or not. So it's not always the way that mental health conditions are treated.
And I really like that, and I want folks to understand this and be able to sort of appreciate that aspect as well, where it's truly individualized, and that's sort of where the magic, right, science of sort of goodness of fit comes in, right? If you're my provider and I trust you, I like you, you're listening to me, and we're coming up with a plan, and you're saying, hey, Yener, these are the things you need based on what's going on with you, and it resonates with me, and I'm actively participating in my treatment, and you're like, you know what, you also need a small dose of whatever for your whatever issue, anxiety or depression, and that's something that I understand. I informed consent, I get it, I know why I need to take it, but then you're also able to tell me, this is sort of what we're looking forward to. You might not necessarily need to be on this for the rest of your life. It might be a discrete episode of care, and that's also okay. And really being able to have that back and forth, right? So it's not just, coming down out of the sky and you have to take it, that having that back and forth. And I think the sort of the most successful sort of relationships and outcomes are based on that relationship, right? It's not a robot. You don't go to an ATM machine and get your meds. And so I encourage everyone to find that comfort and dialogue with their provider, so that if medications is medically necessary, that can be discussed, right? So it's not a default answer.
No, that's great. And I think a good thing to keep in mind is when answering any of these questions is just think about what if we were talking about diabetes? And so it's the same parallel that, medications are an important part of treatment for type 2 diabetes, but there are also other forms of treatment, including things you do around self-care and changing your lifestyle. They're important, and so the patient works with the physician to determine what's best, and if that is medication, then that is part of the conversation. So I think that's a good rule of thumb with when you think about mental health. Just say, what if I'm thinking about a physical health condition?
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thanks. All right, so now turning to how do we help individuals if we're concerned they have mental health conditions. So starting just with a statistic, so Kaiser Permanente, we conducted a large national poll in 2017, and we'll be showing some data points from that. But in surveying, and it was not just of Kaiser members, it was of a large national sample, and the majority of individuals said, first of all, they would want to, and that they would be comfortable offering support to someone who's struggling. So, individuals know it's an important problem, they're concerned, they want to help, but most of us don't know where to start. So we want to talk a little bit now about how to start those conversations.
So what do you do? What do you do, right? So you don't have to necessarily have studied this or be a clinician yourself, right? And the person with this issue, and for this example, something like depression, understanding a little bit more about depression itself, right? I mean, if somebody's obviously sad and crying and telling you that they're depressed, that's fairly sort of straightforward. But being able to look at and understand and appreciate some of the subtler signs and symptoms, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but familiarize yourself about depression and the value in sort of this disorder itself and being familiar with this is that each one of you listening today and the viewers in the future, understanding that you can actually, literally, not only make a difference in someone's life, you can save a life, truly. And it's not hyperbole. Being able to recognize this and get somebody to the appropriate level of care. And so, first of all, understanding that. We'll give resources later on, and that will also be posted. But being able to then listen. I paused for 2 seconds. It felt like an eternity, right? Just listen. I studied psychiatry. I studied psychoanalytic training, right? The hardest part for me, right, and my colleagues, won't show it here, but they roll their eyes, because I do talk a lot. I talk too much sometimes, and I enjoy this. So the hardest part for me, for my training, was learning to zip it up. Be quiet. Listen. Listen to the patient in front of you. Listen to the person in front of you. It's common and more realistic for us to be able to want to just offer. I want to help you, Jennifer. I want to help you so much. Just half a second, quiet, listen, pay attention. Don't offer advice, not just, and definitely sit with and appreciate your own judgments too. There's value in that so that you can develop yourself, right? But sitting there and being able to have a foundation for that person that they can feel heard, understood, right? Appreciated. This guy who talks too much all the time, now all of a sudden he's listening, says Jennifer. Maybe I can talk with him a little bit more, right? And so then, you've created sort of that atmosphere, and now you can say, you know what? Sounds like, you're having this issue. Have you considered talking with somebody about it, a professional, right? And help them get the help that they need, either counseling, a doctor, etc. And sort of the last piece that's on this slide is essentially staying connected with that person, right? So if there's somebody in your family or in your house, by proximity, you're going to be, connected. But if it is like a colleague or a worker, a person that we see occasionally or in the hallways, figuring out a system where you're showing that you're interested in wanting to stay connected, but something that's going to sit well with that person too, right? I might not want Jennifer to call me every single day, but I would think it would be really cool if she said, hey, Yener, listen, tomorrow's Friday, I have an extra sandwich. Would you like me to bring it to you? That might be what I would want, right? And having that sort of connection as well. And lastly, I think the thing that sort of envelops the entirety of this is take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, right? Well, I'm going on a plane tomorrow, and the thing that they say in planes, and now that I have a kid, and it never made sense to me before is, you put the mask on to yourself first, then you can help somebody else, right? If there's an issue in the plane. And that concept where if you're not able to care for yourself first, you're in no position to help or support anyone else. And so pay attention to your own needs as well so that you can be there for somebody else. Next slide, please. So signs and symptoms, or what does it mean? And what are things that, as a doctor that, really get my antenna up and I say, I'm really concerned about the person versus somebody who's not in a sort of doctor-patient relationship, but being able to further appreciate, severity, right? So something like losing interest in things that you used to like, right? I very much like, we were talking about this earlier, Lego with my son, like very much Lego, very much. But now all of a sudden, you know what? I don't want to play with Lego anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. Okay, well, I might be busy. I might have a webinar that I have to prepare for, or it's just been months and months and I'm not doing this, right? And so that's called anhedonia, right? You have loss of pleasure. That's one thing, so a thing to look out for. Another thing I was mentioning in my example before is sleeping, a sleep change, a disturbance. And this can be different for different people. Some people sleep less, and some people sleep more, like you feel tired a lot more. Similarly with appetite, right? There's no sort of one way. It could be less eating or more eating, according to sort of what you were doing on a baseline. Let's not call it normal, but typically what you would normally eat. Has there been a shift, sustained sort of shift in that sense? And the words sort of that I want people to sort of think of that are really concerning would be thoughts of shame, guilt, and hopelessness, right? Those are the big ones that, as you're getting more towards the concerning aspects, and then certainly thoughts of self-harm and self-destruction would be issues that I want people to think about and be comfortable with starting that conversation. Saying something like, how are you? Are you okay? And any level of conversation, even if it's a gut feeling, and I'm totally wrong about this, and I approach Jeff and I'm like, you know what? I'm noticing this. Even if I'm totally wrong, have that. It shows that you're interested and that you're invested in that relationship and that person.
Great. So we're going to move to the next slide. So how do you start the conversation? It's helpful to have some phrases and even to practice these phrases so that if you're concerned about someone, whether that's someone in your immediate family, someone you're close with, or someone that you know more casually, but you're concerned. So here are some phrases, and I'll just ask them of
Sure,
you, Yener.
sure.
I know you well. So Yener, I've noticed that you seem a little down lately. Is it something you want to talk about?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Right, so something like that. Or lately I've gotten the feeling you're having a difficult time. Is there something I can do to help? You can see some of the other phrases on the screen, and we actually have a brief video coming up. But just different comments that show that you care about someone. You could suggest, is it something you maybe want to talk to your doctor about, or can I help you find someone to talk to about that? For that person, it might be their clergy, it might be, through a self-help group, but just finding a way to start that conversation and make sure that people know that it's coming from a place of caring. And if the words you say aren't the right words, that's okay, as long as you're conveying that you really care and you're there to listen. Great, okay. So now we have a brief video. It's from StoryCorps, if folks are familiar with StoryCorps with NPR. And so Kaiser Permanente has partnered with StoryCorps on a series around mental health. This is about a 3-minute video, but it shows a really good conversation between a young adult and his father about the young adult's depression. So we'll hope that
yes, and this is Maura. I'm going to have to stop my sharing for just a moment and transition over to the internet to show the video. Bear with me a moment.
Thank you.
Leo, I want to start by asking if you have depression.
Yes.
And what does depression mean to you?
It sucks. I mean, in 7th grade when I started to get it, and it was getting really bad, I was crying. Like, I was having, like, breakdowns every single day because I felt really bad. And then the first day of school happened, and there was just kind of a gray feel to it. Like, I'd lost my, childhood. It just felt, insignificant.
How would you describe it? to somebody who's never experienced it?
I don't have my neighbor's depression. I don't have that guy over there's depression. I have my depression, and I know that it's different for different people. It just felt like a change in like dimensions almost. It was so subtle that I couldn't put a finger on what it was, but everything was just like slightly different. And I wasn't happy. I would feel really lonely a lot. Depression is like this little puzzle where there is no reason, or maybe there is, but oftentimes there isn't. It's just, this really intense feeling. One of the most intense feelings, especially because it's so constant, at least for me. I was just like hoping this is going to change. If I didn't have that thought in my head, I might not be here.
It was that bad?
Yeah, like that was the thing that I was holding on to, thinking I'll feel better again in the future.
Like it just lived inside you like an illness in that way.
It was just kind of like this endless dark cloud. I had other emotions. It's not like I just became like this, potato. It was just only sad all the time. But there was always underlying feeling of depression, this sagging, almost like a dread that was cast over everything. So it was like you could watch like this really happy scene in a movie, but there's like a blue tone or something, like, it's been treated that way. It was that. With medication and with therapy, it's definitely a lot better. Can't really do much about it to make it completely go away, but I can deal with it. That's okay. I'm not like that person that would be like, if I could go back to 7th grade and change everything, I would. I wouldn't do that because I don't know what else would change. To be honest, I am happy with my life right now.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
When I grew up, there was this sort of shame associated with depression and mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
In your generation, is that also true? Do you know friends who have depression?
Oh, yeah. I think there's way more kids with depression than people think because they don't want to come forward about that.
I still think there's a lot of stigma and shame around mental illness.
It's pathetic and it's sad that people are like that. If you fell and get a big cut and it's getting infected and you're like bleeding out, and if someone's going to come up and be like, you got a cut? Weirdo. It's not the best example, but it's a thing that needs to be treated because it hurts and it's bad for you to just sit with it like it is and not do anything about it.
What would you say to kids who are going through that for the first time, beginning to experience these feelings?
There's really nothing wrong with it. It's not your fault. Try to get help. It will get better.
Great. So hope folks can hear us here. And there are this story, story, and several others that are located on the Find Your Words website, which the information's in this deck. So want to turn briefly to some things that are not so helpful to say. So we shared some good ways to approach the conversation, but there's some things that, although well-intended, are not particularly helpful to folks. So just to say a few of those. One that may not be totally intuitive is, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Why is that not a good thing to say?
Well, because you don't, right? I mean, there's no way for you to actually know exactly how I feel. So what about saying something like, Yener, you're not alone, right? I might not understand exactly how you feel, right? You don't even have to say that. Just say something like, I care about you and I want to help. Right? And this isn't typically the way people talk. I mean, unless you're a clinician or, in the rare instance you actually do talk like this. Most people don't talk like this. But this isn't a normal conversation, right? You're dealing with somebody that has something that's different than the day-to-day norm. So it's okay to talk a little bit differently, and you'll see the results that you get and the way somebody opens up.
Great. All right, we'll just do one more
Sure.
In the interest of time. So you say you're depressed, but you've got no reason to be depressed. Things are great in your life. Why are you depressed? Why is that not helpful?
That makes me feel guilty. That makes me feel ashamed, and that doesn't sort of acknowledge and validate the sort of the internal thoughts and feelings that I'm having. And instead, why not say something like, I've noticed you've been sad or whatever, right? Is there anything that you want to talk about? And we've got all of these examples of how to say things. Practice these things. Look at them. Read them at least once so that you start to understand, because like Jennifer said before, you really can't mess up, but understanding sort of where if you say something that you would normally typically say, or you felt that you would normally say, how it could affect the other person as well. So you're not going to destroy a relationship if you say the stuff on the right column, but understand that it could have a different impact on the person.
Great. Okay, Maura, do you want to move to the next slide? All right, so just to touch on this briefly, which is to say that these conversation starters, these concepts we've talked about, they apply everywhere. But just to highlight mental health issues in the workplace. And it's the same concept, although sometimes the dynamics are a little bit different. But in terms of offering support, really focusing on the whole person, challenge misconceptions, your own misconceptions and the stigma that you carry along. And also, if you hear someone talking about an individual or just talking about mental health in a way that is not accurate or is not helpful. And then not just in the workplace, but in general, mind your words. I think that we're so often use the word crazy, like, oh, I'm so crazy busy, things like that, or, and so just to be really careful in how we talk about mental health issues and be mindful that these things actually do play into and reinforce stigma. All right, so why don't you move into the next slide. So what if you are the individual who's struggling with mental health symptoms and trying to find your own words to speak up and ask for help? So two big concepts. One is, first of all, you get to decide who you talk to about this. That may be pretty obvious, but and think about who are the best people or person to talk with. Someone you feel close to, someone you trust. It could be someone in your life who's a friend, a family member. It might be your primary care physician or someone that provides your medical care, your spiritual leader, if that is part of your life, a teacher, if you are in school. So think about who that is, and practice saying it out loud, and we'll have some phrases in just a moment for individuals. And also, you get to decide what to say. You can tell someone everything that's going on in your life, or you can just choose to share a part of that. But I would also encourage individuals, if part of what you're experiencing is thoughts of wanting to harm yourself or wanting to kill yourself, that is the hardest conversation to have, but the most important conversation. So just as we talked about how you approach someone else and ask them, if you are concerned that someone may be suicidal, it's important to ask directly. And similarly, if you are having those thoughts, it is really important for you to articulate that to someone. And we'll share some resources at the end.
So, having an idea of how to start the conversation itself can help, right? So something like, I want to talk to you about something that's hard for me to put into words, right? Or, you know what, Jennifer, you could support me by, like I said, bring me a sandwich tomorrow because I have no way to get to the store today, or I don't have the energy to get something for myself. And just being able to start that conversation, approaching the other person, and that dynamic will foster the rest of the conversation. Next slide, please.
All right, and so the next few slides we'll just touch on briefly, so we have time for a few questions, but you have them in the deck. So this public health campaign that Kaiser Permanente launched several years ago called Find Your Words, there are many helpful resources. So the videos we shared today, tools around all of these concepts at findyourwords.com, .org, excuse me, and these resources are available to everyone in the community, Kaiser Permanente members, people who are not members, people in other states and other places. So please take a look there and see if there's anything that is helpful for you. The next slide is on kp.org, self-care, and these are a variety of programs and tools to help individuals with resilience, with managing stress, with mindfulness, and similarly, these resources are available to Kaiser Permanente members and to individuals who are not Kaiser Permanente members. And then finally, on the last slide, there are just some important phone numbers and resources for individuals if you're experiencing an emergency, or for yourself or for someone else, or other places to seek care or support. So you have those resources there, and let's take a few questions in the remaining time.
As of this moment, I do not see any questions posed in the chat, but let me scroll through, so bear with me just a moment.
Sure.
Thank you.
And actually, let me take a moment to encourage everyone. In the last few moments we have remaining, if you'd like to pose a question to our presenters, please do so via the Zoom chat. Okay, we have a question. How do you decide whether it's more appropriate to see a therapist versus a psychologist versus a psychiatrist when you're in a clinical setting?
You know, to be very honest, I don't think you can go wrong, right? Because regardless of the level of training, if it's master's level, doctoral level, or a physician, right, level, they'll be able to then determine what your appropriate treatment needs are going to be, and then we'll help you in the treatment planning, and we'll be able to come up with a recommendation, right? So it's not like you make a mistake, you go to the psychiatrist and you get a medicine, right? They'll be able to say, you know what? This is part of your treatment plan, and we'll be able to help you. And then similarly, you know, a master's level, doctoral level therapist will then say something like, you know, this is sort of what's going on, what I'm observing, and it would be helpful if X, Y, Z. I think to elaborate sort of on that, what I would really sort of urge folks to understand is, you know, critical sort of urgencies and emergencies, right? That's where you know, the time is sort of, it ends up being of the essence, where you really don't have much time to spare. Otherwise, you know, your starting point, your entry point into the system really will, you know, be guided by once you speak with a trained clinician.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that, you know, one thing is a psychiatrist is an individual with an MD who can prescribe medication. A therapist could be a master's level therapist or a doctoral PhD level therapist or clinical psychologist. And those individuals do not prescribe medication, although you may see a psychologist for individual psychotherapy and then be prescribed medication by a psychiatrist. So I think that's also, if you're going in and you feel that talk therapy maybe what your fit what you need, then a psychologist or a therapist might be this place to start. If it's something severe, if you're feeling suicidal, first of all, talk to anyone, but or if you think medication might be something that would be helpful to you, then you might want to start with a psychiatrist. But I echo what Yener said, just if you reach into the system, whether that is Kaiser Permanente or your health plan or other system, you know, just get your foot in the door and you'll be assessed and triaged to the right type of care.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So we have only just probably 30 seconds or less remaining. There are some other questions. So what I'll do, I will forward those questions to Dr. Balan and Dr. Christian Herman, and I think they've expressed that they're willing to potentially respond to some of those questions.
Thank you.
Great.
Sure.
So with that, we will go ahead and just very briefly wrap up here, letting everybody know, because there's been a couple of questions posted to the chat, the recording of this presentation and the deck, the entire webinar recording will be available on UCNet as of tomorrow. I may also post a little cleaned up version next week, but that's to be determined. But what we actually presented today will be available by tomorrow, end of day on UCNet. I'm just reminding everyone who's on the call that if you're UC faculty and staff, you do have behavioral health benefits through your medical plan. If you're HealthNet, WHA, Kaiser, Anthem, Blue Cross, you can find all the information about your behavioral health benefits on UCNet, which is our benefits website. And you also have employee assistance resources available on most campuses. They have offices where if you felt that you needed to talk to someone immediately, you could walk in and speak to someone one-on-one. And again, just want to, first of all, apologize for all of the technical snafus at the beginning, and thank you so much to our presenters for being so gracious and flexible as we worked out some of those kinks. And thank you so much for your willingness to participate in this series and to share your knowledge with us. Thank you both, Dr. Yener and Christian Herman.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. With that, we'll end this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending.